The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Lecture Hall B at Pacific Coast University. It was 8:45 a.m., and students slowly filled the rows of seats, their faces showing a mix of sleepiness and worry. The first day of advanced calculus was about to begin, and everyone knew about Dr. Harrison Winters. Dr. Winters stood at his desk, organizing his notes with careful hands. At 62 years old, he had taught mathematics for over 30 years. His hair was mostly gray now, with just a few strands of black remaining. His thin wire glasses sat perfectly straight on his nose, and his dark blue suit looked freshly pressed. Everything about him was exact and orderly, just like the equations he loved. "I hear he made a girl cry last semester," whispered a young man in the front row. "That's nothing." "My brother said he failed half his class on purpose," replied his friend. Dr. Winters heard these whispers but did not react. In fact, he enjoyed his reputation. He believed that mathematics was not for everyone, and he saw himself as the gatekeeper who decided who deserved to learn its secrets. Over the years, he had developed a special talent for finding the weakest student in each class and using them as an example for the others. The clock showed 9 a.m. exactly when Dr. Winters cleared his throat. The room fell silent immediately. "Welcome to advanced calculus," he said, his voice clear and cold. "Look to your left. Look to your right. One of those people will not finish this course." The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Dr. Winters began to take attendance, his eyes scanning the room as he called each name, already looking for his next target. "Emily Anderson." "Here," said a nervous voice. "Michael Chen." "Present, sir." He continued down the list until Clint Eastwood? A few students laughed, thinking it was a joke, but then a deep voice from the back of the room answered, "Here." All heads turned. In the last row sat a man unlike any other student. He was in his early 50s with weathered skin that had seen many days under the sun. His hair was thick and gray at the temples, and his eyes were narrow, as if always looking into the distance. He wore a simple button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and a pair of worn jeans. His large hands rested calmly on the desk in front of him. It was indeed Clint Eastwood, the famous actor and director, but no one in the room could understand why he was sitting in an advanced calculus class at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. Dr. Winters paused, his pen hovering over his attendance sheet. He had heard that sometimes famous people took classes at universities, but usually in subjects like film or literature, not advanced mathematics. He made a small mark next to Eastwood's name and continued. After taking attendance, Dr. Winters began his first lecture. He spoke about the course requirements, the textbooks they would need, and his strict grading policy. Then he moved on to a review of basic calculus concepts. "Before we move forward, we must make sure everyone remembers the fundamentals," he said, writing a complex-looking equation on the board. "Who can solve this?" Several hands went up, mostly from eager young students in the front rows. Dr. Winters called on a young woman who correctly answered the question. He nodded without smiling and wrote another, more difficult problem. As the lecture continued, Dr. Winters noticed that Eastwood did not take any notes. While other students frantically wrote down everything on the board, the older man simply listened, his eyes focused on the equations. Occasionally, he would tilt his head slightly as if considering a particular point from a different angle. But his notebook remained empty, and he never raised his hand. This bothered Dr. Winters more than he expected. Was this famous actor just taking the class for fun? Did he think he was too important to participate like the other students? By the end of the lecture, Dr. Winters had decided that Clint Eastwood would be his example this semester. As students packed their bags to leave, Dr. Winters called out, "Mr. Eastwood, a word, please." The actor made his way to the front of the room while the other students filed out, many of them stealing curious glances at the famous man. "Mr. Eastwood," Dr. Winters said when they were alone, "I couldn't help but notice you didn't take any notes today." Eastwood looked at him with calm eyes. "I prefer to listen and think," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "I find I remember things better that way." "I see," Dr. Winters replied, not bothering to hide his doubt. Well, this is a very demanding course. Many students with traditional academic backgrounds struggle with it. I wonder if perhaps you might be more comfortable in a lower-level class. Eastwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I appreciate your concern, Professor, he said, but I'd like to stay in this course if that's all right. Dr. Winters gave a thin smile. As you wish, but I should warn you that I expect all students to fully participate. That includes solving problems in front of the class when called upon. I understand, Eastwood said with a small nod. After Eastwood left, Dr. Winters sat at his desk thinking. Why would someone like Clint Eastwood take an advanced calculus course? It made no sense. The man was in his 50s, already successful in his career. What could he possibly gain from this? What Dr. Winters didn't know was that mathematics had been Clint Eastwood's secret passion since he was young. Long before he became famous, Eastwood had loved numbers and equations. As a teenager, he had dreamed of becoming a mathematician, spending hours with books on calculus and geometry. Life had taken him in a different direction, leading him to success in Hollywood instead. But his love for mathematics had never died. Over the years between film projects, Eastwood had studied on his own. He had shelves of advanced mathematics books in his home, all well-read and filled with his notes. He had even corresponded with famous mathematicians, though always keeping his identity hidden behind a simple pen name. Now, after decades of self-study, Eastwood had decided to finally get a formal education in the subject he loved. He had enrolled at Pacific Coast University using his real name, hoping that in a serious academic environment, people would see past his fame and treat him like any other student seeking knowledge. But as Eastwood walked across the sunny campus, after that first class, he realized that Dr. Winters had already decided what kind of student he was. The professor had looked at him and seen only an aging actor out of place in a world of equations. Eastwood smiled slightly to himself. He had faced doubters before, both in Hollywood and in his private mathematical studies. He was not bothered by the professor's attitude. In fact, it reminded him of a challenging role, one where he needed to slowly reveal the true character beneath the surface. This might be interesting, he thought as he walked toward his next class, the sun warm on his shoulders and complex equations already forming in his mind. What Eastwood didn't know was just how interesting things would get in the coming weeks, as Dr. Winters prepared to make an example of him in front of the entire class. 3 weeks passed since the first day of class. The students of advanced calculus now knew the routine. Each morning they would enter Lecture Hall B with nervous energy. Dr. Winters would begin with a quick review, then call on random students to solve problems on the board. Those who failed became examples of how not to approach calculus, as the professor liked to say. The classroom had its own social order now. The front rows held the confident math majors who raised their hands for every question. The middle section contained the hard-working students who didn't speak much but took detailed notes, and the back rows were for those trying to stay invisible, hoping Dr. Winters would forget they existed. Clint Eastwood still sat in the last row, but he didn't fit any of these groups. Each day, he arrived exactly 5 minutes early, took the same seat, and listened with complete focus. He never volunteered to answer questions, but when called upon, he gave correct answers in his short, direct way, and still he never wrote anything down. This continued to bother Dr. Winters more than he cared to admit. The famous actor was passing his class without seeming to try. Today, the professor decided that would change. "Good morning, Dr. Winters," said as the clock hit 9:01 a.m. "Today we begin our work on differential equations, which many consider the most challenging part of this course." He wrote a series of equations on the board, explaining each step carefully. The students' pens moved quickly across their notebooks, all except for Eastwood's. "These equations allow us to describe how things change over time," Dr. Winters continued. "They help engineers build bridges, economists predict markets, and scientists understand everything from weather patterns to the spread of disease." As he spoke, Dr. Winters moved casually through the room, walking up and down the aisles between desks. This was unusual. Normally, he stayed at the front, commanding the room like a general. Students exchanged nervous glances as he passed by. When, He reached the back row. Dr. Winters stopped beside Eastwood's desk. He looked down at the empty notebook, then at the actor's weathered face. The whole class held their breath. "Mr. Eastwood," the professor said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "I see you're continuing your practice of not taking notes." Eastwood looked up calmly. "Yes, sir. As I mentioned before, I prefer to listen." "Indeed. And do you find this method is working well for you?" "So far, yes." Dr. Winters smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then perhaps you'd be willing to show us the benefits of your unique approach. Please come to the board." Eastwood stood up slowly. At his full height, he was taller than the professor, his shoulders broader. He walked to the front of the room with the same unhurried confidence he showed in his films. Students watched with wide eyes as he took the chalk Dr. Winters offered. "Since you seem so confident that you can coast through my class without taking notes," Dr. Winters announced, "perhaps you'd care to solve this problem." He wrote a new equation on the board, much more complex than anything they had covered so far. It filled nearly half the blackboard with a maze of symbols, Greek letters, and numbers. Several students gasped quietly. This was graduate-level work, not something from their undergraduate course. "This," Dr. Winters said with a satisfied smile, "is a partial differential equation used in advanced physics. It has stumped many of my brightest students over the years, but perhaps Mr. Eastwood, with his listening approach, can show us all how it's done." The room fell completely silent. A few students looked down at their desks, embarrassed by the obvious attempt to humiliate the older student. Others watched with curiosity. No one expected Eastwood to solve the impossible problem. Eastwood studied the equation without speaking. His eyes moved slowly across the board, taking in each symbol. The silence stretched for 1 minute, then 2. Dr. Winters crossed his arms, his smile growing wider with each passing moment. "Take your time, Mr. Eastwood," the professor said. "Or if you'd prefer to admit that perhaps note-taking has its advantages after all, you're welcome to return to your seat." More silence. Then, something changed in Eastwood's expression. A small light appeared in his eyes, like a hunter who has finally spotted his target. Without a word, he raised the chalk and began to write. His hand moved with surprising speed and confidence. He started by breaking the massive equation into smaller parts, rearranging terms in a way no one had expected. His writing was neat and precise, each step following logically from the last. Dr. Winters' smile faded. His eyebrows pulled together as he watched. This was not what he had planned. The actor was supposed to stand there helplessly, then return to his seat with a valuable lesson learned. Instead, Eastwood was working through the problem with the skill of an experienced mathematician. Students began to whisper to each other. Even the confident math majors in the front row looked confused. The equation Eastwood was solving used techniques they had never seen before. After 10 minutes of steady work, Eastwood wrote a final line, circled his answer, and put down the chalk. He stepped back from the board, his face showing no emotion. "Dr." Winters stared at the solution. He walked closer to the board, checking each step carefully. His face had gone pale, and a small bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. The solution was correct. Not only that, but Eastwood had used an elegant approach that simplified the problem in ways Dr. Winters himself hadn't considered. It was the work of someone with deep mathematical understanding, not a lucky guess or a memorized procedure. "Is that correct, Professor?" Eastwood asked quietly. Dr. Winters cleared his throat. "The answer appears to be, yes, it's correct." He turned to face Eastwood. "Where did you learn this method? We haven't covered it in class." "I read about it years ago in a book by Teiji Takagi, a Japanese mathematician," Eastwood said. "His approach always seemed clearer to me than the standard method." The name Takagi clearly meant something to Dr. Winters. His eyes widened slightly before he controlled his expression. "I see," he said. "Well, that's very good, Mr. Eastwood. You may return to your seat." Eastwood nodded and walked back to his desk, still showing no sign of triumph or pride. The other students watched him with new eyes. The whispers grew louder as Dr. Winters turned back to the board, trying to gather his thoughts. "That was amazing," the student next to Eastwood whispered. "How did you know how to do that?" Eastwood gave a small smile but didn't answer. His eyes returned to the front of the room where Dr. Winters was erasing the board with quick, angry motions. For the rest of the class, Dr. Winters spoke without his usual confidence. He made a small mistake in one equation and had to correct himself. He called on no more students to solve problems. When the class ended, he dismissed them quickly and sat down at his desk, looking troubled. As Eastwood packed up to leave, he knew that something had changed. He hadn't meant to embarrass the professor. He had simply answered the question as best he could. But now Dr. Winters would see him differently, and so would the other students. Walking across campus in the bright morning sun, Eastwood wondered what would happen next. The professor didn't seem like a man who accepted defeat easily. This challenge was just the beginning, not the end. What Eastwood didn't know was that at that very moment Dr. Winters was looking up his student's name in the university system, searching for answers about the mysterious actor who solved impossible equations without taking notes. Dr. Harrison Winters sat in his office late into the evening. Books and papers covered his desk, and his computer screen glowed in the dimly lit room. For hours, he had been searching for information about Clint Eastwood, not the actor everyone knew from movies, but the mathematician no one knew existed. At first, he had found nothing unusual. University records showed that Eastwood had enrolled as a special student, not seeking a degree but taking classes for personal interest. His application mentioned only a basic education and gave no hint of advanced mathematical training. Dr. Winters had then searched academic journals and mathematics publications. Again, nothing with Eastwood's name appeared. But then, remembering what Eastwood had said about Teiji Takagi's work, he tried a different approach. He looked for recent papers that used Takagi's methods, papers written by authors he didn't recognize. That's when he found it, a series of 5 papers published in respected mathematics journals over the past 15 years. The author was listed as C.E. Manning. The papers dealt with complex mathematical problems solved with unusual elegance. The most recent one had been published just 6 months ago. It can't be, Dr. Winters whispered to himself. But the writing, style, the approach to the problems, the reference to Takagi's work, it all pointed to one conclusion. C.E. Manning was Clint Eastwood. The professor leaned back in his chair, removing his glasses to rub his tired eyes. How was it possible? How could a Hollywood actor secretly be publishing papers that even professional mathematicians admired? And why keep it secret? Dr. Winters' phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was the department chair, Dr. Reynolds. "Harrison, are you still in your office? It's almost 10 p.m. "Yes, I'm researching something," Dr. Winters replied. "Well, I wanted to tell you that the dean just informed me about a special guest lecture next week. Apparently, Richard Feynman's daughter is visiting campus and wants to talk about her father's work. She specifically asked if she could visit your advanced calculus class." "Feynman?" Dr. Winters repeated, his mind still on Eastwood's papers. "Yes, that's fine." "Good. Oh, and Harrison? I heard an interesting rumor today. Is it true that Clint Eastwood is in your class?" Dr. Winters' attention snapped back fully. "Yes, he is." "Fascinating. What's he like as a student?" Dr. Winters hesitated. "He's surprising." The next morning, the atmosphere in Lecture Hall B was different. News of Eastwood's performance had spread throughout the mathematics department. Students from other classes had asked to sit in, and the room was more crowded than usual. Even a few younger professors stood at the back, pretending they had just stopped by with messages for Dr. Winters. Eastwood arrived at his usual time, 5 minutes early. He noticed the extra people but showed no reaction. He took his regular seat in the back row and waited quietly. Students nearby looked at him with new respect, and a few brave ones asked questions about the method he had used yesterday. He answered politely but briefly. Dr. Winters entered exactly at 9 a.m. His face showed he hadn't slept much. He carried more books than usual and a folder of papers that hadn't been part of his materials before. He began the class without his usual confidence. "Today we will continue with differential equations," he said. "But first I want to revisit yesterday's problem." The room grew quiet. Everyone expected Dr. Winters to challenge Eastwood again, or perhaps claim there had been a mistake in the solution. Instead, he did something no one had ever seen him do before. "I owe Mr. Eastwood an apology," he said, looking directly at the actor. "The problem I presented yesterday was far beyond the scope of this course. It was meant to, well, my intentions are not important. What matters is that Mr. Eastwood not only solved it correctly, but did so using an elegant approach that demonstrates a deep understanding of mathematical principles." Students exchanged shocked looks. Dr. Winters never apologized to anyone. "In fact," the professor continued, "the method Mr. Eastwood used has only been explored in a series of papers published by a mathematician named C.E. Manning." At the mention of this name, Eastwood's calm expression changed slightly. A small line appeared between his eyebrows, and he sat up straighter in his chair. Dr. Winters noticed the reaction. "For those interested in this approach, I've made copies of Manning's most recent paper." He held up the folder he had brought. "I believe it may help us understand some of the more complex concepts we'll cover later in the semester." Throughout the rest of the lecture, Dr. Winters taught with unusual energy and clarity. He referenced Manning's work several times, each time glancing at Eastwood. The actor remained silent, his face once again calm, but his eyes never left the professor. When class ended, students gathered around Dr. Winters to get copies of the paper. Eastwood waited until everyone else had left before approaching the front of the room. He said quietly. It wasn't a question. Dr. Winters nodded. "C.E. Manning, Clint Eastwood Manning. Not very subtle once I thought about it." "My mother's maiden name," Eastwood explained. "I never expected anyone to make the connection." "Why?" Dr. Winters asked, genuinely curious now. "Why publish under a different name? Why hide your work?" Eastwood looked out the window for a moment before answering. "People have certain ideas about who I am, what I can and can't do. If I had published as Clint Eastwood, no one would have taken the work seriously. They would have assumed it was a publicity stunt or that someone else did the real work." "But these papers," Dr. Winters said, tapping the folder, "they're brilliant. The mathematical community has been discussing Manning's work for years. You could have had recognition, respect from academics." Eastwood smiled slightly. "I've had enough recognition in my life, Professor. What I wanted was to contribute something meaningful to mathematics without my name getting in the way. The work matters, not who did it." Dr. Winters shook his head, in wonder. "How did you learn all this? Your university records don't show any advanced mathematics training." "I've always loved numbers," Eastwood said. "Even as a young man, before I became an actor, I studied on my own whenever I could between films and other projects. Books, correspondence courses, meetings with mathematicians who didn't know who I was or didn't care." "And Feynman?" Dr. Winters asked, remembering his conversation with the department chair. "Did you really study with Richard Feynman?" Eastwood's eyes lit up with genuine warmth. "Yes, in the 1970s, between Westerns. I attended some of his lectures at Caltech. He was different from other professors. He didn't care that I was an actor. He only cared that I loved physics and mathematics as much as he did." Dr. Winters sat down at his desk, trying to process everything. The famous actor standing before him was also C.E. Manning, a mathematician whose papers he had studied and admired. It was like discovering that a character from a movie had stepped into real life. "His daughter is coming next week," Dr. Winters said, "to visit our class." Now it was Eastwood's turn to look surprised. "Michelle? She's coming here? You know her?" "Yes. She was just a teenager when I knew her father, but we've stayed in touch over the years. She's the one who encouraged me to publish my work, even if it was under a different name." Dr. Winters realized that his world had just become much more complicated. The student he had tried to humiliate was not only a famous actor but also a respected mathematician with connections to one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century. "Mr. Eastwood," he said finally, "I think we need to talk more about this. Perhaps you would join me for coffee?" Eastwood nodded. "I'd like that, Professor. And please, call me Clint." As they walked out of the lecture hall together, students in the hallway stared in amazement. The strict professor and the famous actor talking like old friends. No one knew what had happened between them, but everyone could see that something had changed. What they couldn't see was that both men were experiencing a rare feeling. The joy of finding someone who understood their love for mathematics. Someone who saw past the surface to what really mattered. The campus coffee shop was busy with students rushing between classes, but no one bothered the two men sitting in the corner table. Dr. Winters and Clint Eastwood sat across from each other, steam rising from their cups as they talked quietly. "So," Dr. Winters said, "tell me how this all started. How does a famous actor become a secret mathematician?" Eastwood smiled slightly. "It was the other way around, actually. The math came first." He took a sip of his black coffee and began his story. A young boy growing up in Oakland, California, Clint had always loved numbers. While other children played baseball or watched TV, he would spend hours solving math puzzles. His teachers noticed his talent early, but his family moved often, making it hard for him to get special attention at school. "My father worked different jobs, so we never stayed in one place very long," Eastwood explained. "By the time a teacher realized I had a gift for mathematics, we'd be packing up to move again." In high school, a math teacher named Mr. Peterson finally recognized Clint's unusual ability. He gave the boy advanced books and problems to work on. For the first time, Clint felt someone understood his passion for numbers. "He told me I could become a great mathematician someday," Eastwood said, his eyes looking into the past. "He even helped me apply for a scholarship to study mathematics in college." Dr. Winters leaned forward, interested. "Did you get it?" "Yes," Eastwood nodded. "But then my father lost his job again. The scholarship wasn't enough to cover everything, and I needed to help support the family. So I joined the Army instead." During his time in the military, Clint kept studying mathematics on his own. He carried textbooks with him, working on problems during quiet moments. Other soldiers thought he was strange, but he didn't care. After leaving the Army, he planned to finally attend college and study mathematics properly. He had saved some money and was ready to pursue his dream. But then life took an unexpected turn. "I was doing odd jobs in Los Angeles trying to save enough for tuition," Eastwood said. "One day, someone suggested I try being an extra in movies. The pay was good, and I thought I'd do it just long enough to save for school." He laughed softly. "I never made it to college. One small role led to another, and suddenly I was acting full-time. Before I knew it, I was in Italy, filming westerns." Dr. Winters frowned. "But you didn't give up mathematics completely?" "No." Eastwood shook his head. "I couldn't. It was too much a part of me. I kept studying between filming. I'd bring books to the set. The other actors thought I was learning my lines, but I was solving differential equations." As his acting career grew, Eastwood found ways to keep his mathematical studies private. He built a library of advanced textbooks. He corresponded with mathematicians using his mother's maiden name, Manning. He attended lectures at universities when his schedule allowed, sitting quietly in the back, just another face in the crowd. "And then came Feynman," Eastwood said with genuine warmth in his voice. It happened in 1974. Eastwood was already a famous actor, but he managed to attend a series of public lectures by Richard Feynman at Caltech without being recognized. After one lecture, he stayed late to ask questions. Feynman, always interested in passionate learners, invited him to come to his office hours. "I was nervous about telling him who I was," Eastwood admitted. "Famous people often get treated differently, but Feynman just laughed when I told him." "So what?" he said to me. "You're good at pretending to shoot people, and you're good at math. The second part is the only one I care about." For the next 2 years, whenever Eastwood was in California, he would visit Feynman. They would talk about physics, mathematics, and life. The famous physicist became his mentor and friend. He was the one who first suggested I try publishing some of my work, Eastwood explained. But he understood why I wanted to use a different name. He said the work should stand on its own. Dr. Winters nodded slowly. And that's when C.E. Manning was born. Yes. My first paper was published in 1979. I was terrified it would be rejected, that real mathematicians would see through me. But it wasn't. It was accepted, and people started referring to Manning's method in other papers. Over the next decades, as Eastwood's Hollywood career flourished, C.E. Manning published papers every few years. They were never frequent enough to raise questions about the mysterious mathematician who rarely attended conferences, but they were good enough to be respected and cited by others in the field. "Why come back to school now?" Dr. Winters asked. "You've clearly mastered the material on your own." Eastwood looked down at his coffee cup. "After all these years, I still regret not getting that formal education. I wanted to see what it would be like to be in a real classroom, to be part of the academic world openly. And," he added with a small smile, "I wanted to finally get a degree, even if I'm the oldest student in the class." Dr. Winters smiled too. "Well, you're certainly the most surprising student I've ever had." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Around them, students rushed in and out of the coffee shop, young people with their whole lives ahead of them. Dr. Winters thought about how different Eastwood's life might have been if he had been able to study mathematics from the beginning. "Do you regret it?" he asked suddenly. "The path your life took? Do you wish you had become a mathematician instead of an actor?" Eastwood considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "when I read about new discoveries or breakthroughs, I wonder what I might have contributed if I'd had the proper training early on. But then I think about all the films I've made, the stories I've helped tell, the people I've worked with. No, I don't regret the life I've lived." He looked directly at Dr. Winters. "But I do regret that I've had to keep these two parts of myself separate, the actor and the mathematician. It feels good to finally have someone who knows both sides." Dr. Winters nodded, understanding. "Your secret is safe with me if that's what you want, but I have to ask. What about Michelle Feynman's visit next week? She knows who you are, both as Eastwood and Manning." "Yes," Eastwood said. "That will be interesting. I should call her before she arrives. I don't think she knows I'm taking classes here. It might be quite a surprise for her to see me sitting in your classroom." "For everyone," Dr. Winters agreed. "The department chair is already excited just to have Clint Eastwood, the actor, in my class. When he finds out you're also C.E. Manning and a friend of the Feynman family." Eastwood's face grew serious. "I'm not ready for that. Not yet. I came here to learn, not to be a celebrity or cause a stir in the mathematics department." Dr. Winters understood. He had spent the past 3 weeks trying to humiliate this man, seeing him only as an actor out of place in a mathematics classroom. Now he knew better. Eastwood, or Manning, deserved his privacy and respect. "We'll handle it carefully," he promised. "For now, in my classroom, you're just another student, a very gifted one, but still a student." Eastwood nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Professor." As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, Dr. Winters had one more question. "Tomorrow's class," he said. "Will you start taking notes now that I know your secret?" Eastwood laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "No," he said. "I really do remember things better when I just listen. Some habits are too hard to break, even for an old man like me." Dr. Winters shook his head, smiling. "You know, you're going to make all the other students think they don't need to take notes either. Then give them a pop quiz," Eastwood suggested with a twinkle in his eye. "That should change their minds quickly." The two men walked out of the coffee shop together, an unlikely pair bound by their shared love of mathematics and their new understanding of each other. Neither of them could have predicted this outcome when the semester began, but sometimes the most important lessons happen outside the planned curriculum. What they didn't know was that Michelle Feynman's visit would bring even more surprises and would change both their lives in ways they couldn't imagine. The day of Michelle Feynman's visit arrived. Lecture Hall B was packed more than ever before. News had spread across campus that the daughter of the famous physicist Richard Feynman would be giving a special lecture. Even students who knew nothing about calculus had come to listen. Dr. Winters stood at the front of the room looking more nervous than anyone had ever seen him. He kept checking the door and his watch. Beside him, a chair sat empty, waiting for their special guest. Clint Eastwood arrived at his usual time, 5 minutes early. Instead of going to his regular seat in the back row, he paused at the door as if deciding something. Then, to everyone's surprise, he walked to the front row and sat down. Students whispered excitedly. In the past week, rumors had spread about what had happened in class, how the famous actor had solved an impossible equation, how Dr. Winters had apologized to him, and how the two had been seen talking together at the coffee shop. No one knew the full truth, but everyone sensed that something important had changed. At exactly 9 a.m., the door opened again. A woman in her 50s with curly brown hair and bright, intelligent eyes walked in. Dr. Winters hurried to greet her. "Dr. Feynman, welcome to Pacific Coast University," he said formally. "We're honored to have you visit our class." Michelle Feynman smiled. "Thank you for inviting me, Dr. Winters. My father always said that teaching was the best way to truly understand something. I'm looking forward to sharing his work with your students." As Dr. Winters led her to the front of the room, Michelle's eyes swept over the students. When she saw Eastwood in the front row, she stopped suddenly. Her smile grew wider. "Clint!" she exclaimed. "What on earth are you doing here?" The room erupted in whispers. Dr. Winters looked uncomfortable, but Eastwood stood up calmly and walked to the front. "Hello, Michelle," he said, giving her a warm hug. "I'm a student in Dr. Winters' class." Michelle laughed. "A student? You? After all these years?" She turned to Dr. Winters. "Do you have any idea who you have in your class? Not just a famous actor, but one of the most creative mathematical minds I know." Dr. Winters nodded slowly. "I recently became aware of Mr. Eastwood's mathematical background." Michelle turned back to Eastwood. "So they finally know? About Manning?" A hush fell over the room. Students leaned forward, trying to hear every word. Eastwood sighed. "Dr. Winters knows. No one else? Until now." Michelle looked embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was still a secret." Dr. Winters stepped in quickly. "Perhaps we should begin the lecture, Dr. Feynman. We can discuss this privately afterward." Michelle nodded, but as she moved toward the chair at the front, she had another idea. "Actually," she said, "I think this is perfect. I was planning to talk about my father's belief that science and creativity are deeply connected. Who better to help me demonstrate this than Clint?" She turned to Eastwood. "Would you mind joining me? We could tell them about that project you and my father worked on together." Eastwood hesitated, looking at Dr. Winters. The professor gave him a small nod of encouragement. "All right," Eastwood said finally. "But only if Dr. Winters joins us too." And so, to the amazement of everyone in the room, the special lecture became a 3-person conversation. Michelle Feynman talked about her father's work and unique approach to physics and mathematics. Eastwood shared stories about working with Richard Feynman on a mathematical model they had developed together to analyze the physics of certain film stunts, and Dr. Winters connected their ideas to the concepts in the course, helping students see how the abstract equations in their textbooks related to the real world. As they talked, the secret of C.E. Manning came out naturally. Michelle explained how her father had encouraged Eastwood to publish his mathematical insights, and how they had created the pen name together. "My father always said that ideas should be judged on their merit, not on who came up with them," Michelle told the class. "He believed Clint's work was important, but he understood why Clint wanted it to stand on its own, separate from his Hollywood fame." Students listened with wide eyes as they realized that the quiet older man who had sat in the back of their class was actually a published mathematician whose work was respected around the world. One brave student raised her hand. "Mr. Eastwood," she asked, "why did you decide to come to our university now after all these years?" Eastwood thought for a moment before answering. "I've spent my life telling stories through film," he said, "but mathematics has always been my private passion, my way of understanding the world. At some point, I realized that keeping these two parts of my life separate wasn't necessary anymore. I wanted to experience what I missed when I was young, being part of a learning community, studying with others who love numbers as much as I do. He looked at Dr. Winters. Even if some professors thought an old actor had no business in their calculus class, the room filled with laughter, including Dr. Winters himself. "I've never been so happy to be wrong," the professor admitted. As the special lecture ended, students crowded around the front of the room asking questions and getting autographs from all three speakers. For once, Dr. Winters didn't mind that his class had gone off schedule. Something more important than his lesson plan had happened today. In the weeks that followed, Dr. Harrison Winters' advanced calculus class became the most popular course on campus. Students who had never considered mathematics as a major signed up for the waiting list. The department chair was thrilled, even if he didn't fully understand what had caused the sudden interest. The reason was simple. Dr. Winters and Clint Eastwood had formed an unusual teaching partnership. While the professor still led the class officially, he often invited Eastwood to share his unique perspective on difficult concepts. Together, they showed students how mathematics connected to art, film, architecture, and everyday life. Eastwood still didn't take notes. But now, instead of sitting in the back row, he had a chair at the front of the room. Sometimes he would bring in clips from his films to demonstrate mathematical principles in action, the physics of a stunt, the geometry of a camera angle, or the patterns in a musical score. When the semester ended, Dr. Winters invited Eastwood to his office. "I've been thinking," he said, "about next semester. The department chair has asked me to teach a special seminar on applied mathematics. I was wondering if you might be interested in co-teaching it with me." Eastwood raised his eyebrows. "Me? A teacher? Why not?" Dr. Winters smiled. "You've been teaching all semester already. The students love your approach, and I've learned as much from you as they have." Eastwood considered the offer. "What would we call this seminar?" "I was thinking, mathematics in the real world. From theory to practice." Eastwood nodded slowly. "I like that, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "The course material should include at least one paper by C.E. Manning." Dr. Winters laughed. "Of course. And perhaps if Manning feels ready, he might consider publishing a new paper soon, under his real name this time." Eastwood smiled. "Maybe. One step at a time, Professor." As they shook hands, both men realized how far they had come since that first day of class. Dr. Winters had planned to humiliate an actor who dared to enter his mathematical world. Instead, he had discovered a friend and colleague who had taught him to see beyond appearances and assumptions. And Clint Eastwood, who had kept his mathematical genius hidden for decades, had finally found a place where both sides of himself could exist together, the actor and the mathematician, no longer separate but parts of a whole person. Sometimes the most important lessons aren't found in textbooks, and the best teachers are the ones who are still learning themselves. In a classroom where a professor had tried to humiliate a student, both had instead found something unexpected: mutual respect, friendship, and a new chapter in their lives. The next semester, when new students walked into Lecture Hall B for the special seminar, they found two professors waiting for them, one with a stack of carefully organized notes and one with no notes at all. But both were ready to teach in their own ways the beauty and power of mathematics.